Number 3.
A recent report stated that less than 35% of adult residents in a certain city will be able to pass a physical fitness test. Consequently, the city's recreation department is trying to convince the city council to fund more physical fitness programs. The council is facing budget constraints and is skeptical of the report. The council will fund more physical fitness programs only if the recreation department can provide convincing evidence that the report is true. The Recreation Department plans to collect data from a sample of 185 adult residents in the city. A test of significance will be conducted with a significance level of alpha equals 0.05 for the following hypothesis. Null hypothesis that the proportion of residents that are physically fit, who are able to pass the physical fitness test is 0.35, and the alternative is that the proportion of residents who can pass the fitness test is less than. Describe what a type 2 error would be in the context of the study, and also describe a consequence of making this type of error. So this is actually an easy problem described as a difficult problem. There's not really a lot that you have to be super good at in order to be successful at this problem. For part A, first you got to remember what the difference between type 1 error and type 2 error is. Type 1 error is when you reject the null hypothesis even though the null hypothesis is actually correct. Basically, you rejected it even though you weren't supposed to. And then type 2 error is when you fail to reject the null hypothesis even if the null hypothesis isn't actually correct. Basically, you were supposed to reject it, but you don't. You should have, but you didn't have enough evidence to. So in this problem, a type 2 error would basically be we fail to reject the null hypothesis even though the null hypothesis is in fact true, or in other words, we find we don't find enough evidence to support the alternative hypothesis even though there is evidence to support the null hypothesis. So in context for this problem, basically we would assume that the proportion of people who can pass the fitness test is 0.35, even if that's not necessarily the case, even if it is in fact less. And to answer this problem, all we have to do is basically write that in a cohesive sentence. So now a potential consequence of that, remember the idea here is that the recreation department is trying to prove that the proportion of people that can pass a fitness test is less than 0.35, so that they can convince the city council to give them more money, right? Or rather, fund more programs. They're not just trying to take money. So in this case, they wouldn't be able to reject the null hypothesis, meaning they didn't have enough evidence for the alternative. So basically, they didn't have enough evidence that there is, in fact, less than 0.35, a proportion of 0.35 of the population for the city that can pass a fitness test. Therefore, they don't have evidence that they actually need the funding. So basically, a consequence would be that the residents of the city are, in fact, out of shape, and the city doesn't fund more programs, even though they probably should have. So again, we just have to write that as a cohesive sentence. So here we go. And there you go. Part A, done.
Letter B.
The Recreation Department recruits 185 adult residents who volunteer to take the physical fitness test. The test is passed by 77 out of the 185 volunteers, resulting in a p-value of 0.97 for the hypothesis stated above. If it was reasonable to conduct a test of significance for the hypothesis stated above using the data collected from the 185 volunteers, what would the p-value of 0.97 lead you to believe? So this is, again, actually super easy. It's just disguised as something that would be difficult. All this is saying is, what would you do with a p-value of 0.97? Well, if the p-value is less than alpha, you reject the null hypothesis. If it's not, then you don't. Is 0.97 less than 0.05. So we won't reject the null hypothesis. So all we got to do is write that. So well, hold on. So since we aren't rejecting the null hypothesis, we do not have enough evidence for the alternative hypothesis. And actually, if you do the math, if you do the test yourself, you'll actually get a proportion on the other side of 0.35, suggesting, if anything, that we should have done the test the other way, that more than 0.35 of the population is in good shape. So I'm good on the city. But anyway, we just have to put that in a good sentence. So here we go. And there you go.
Letter C.
Describe the primary flaw in the study described in Part B and explain why it is a concern. So this harkens back to Unit 3, right? So again, if we read Part B, there are a couple things that went wrong, right? Not really. It's really just like one big thing that should stand out, and that is they recruit 105 adult residents who volunteer to take the physical fitness test. The thing is, when you have volunteers, you can't, all you can do is make a judgment about those volunteers, right? You can't extrapolate to the rest of the population. It's not random. It has to be random in order to truly be an experiment that makes a statement about the rest of the population of the city. So these being volunteers, you can't really say much, especially thinking, what kind of random volunteer is going to volunteer for a physical fitness test? Like, these are people who probably like doing fitness. It's gross. So we just come up with some, concise way to say that, and we have Part C done. So let's give it a shot. And there you go. Done. That's the whole thing. I told you this one was pretty easy.